Dr. Miles Parker, who again, fantastically well qualified to speak actually from all angles on these issues. Originally a marine scientist, but has worked at the heart of science advice to policy in his role as Deputy Chief Science Advisor in DEFRA, and DEFRA's Director of Science. And he's now an Associate Fellow of the Cambridge Centre for Science and Policy. So he's been on all sides of this debate, science, policy, and then thinking about science and policy. So, Miles, over to you.
Thank you very much. I must say it's a hard call to follow Roger in this particular discussion. After all, he did really write the book, and I would say that the Gospel according to St. Roger is widely read among science advisors in government, and has been a fabulous contribution to thinking in this area. If I could make one comment, and I want to test this with Roger later, I'd say what he's talking about is the supply side of this story. He's talking about the expert community talking to the policymakers, and I want to try and address this from the demand side and approach it from the viewpoint of my often long-suffering policy colleagues, the guys in the ministries, departments and delivery agencies who actually help to formulate or implement policies, and the politicians who have to decide on them. For shorthand, I'm going to refer to that entire group as pols, and you'll have to read both into it. And if I was going to try and sum up what the pols want, it's the best available evidence that can help them deliver or implement policies that work. And in that sentence, I've written in enough for a large book to explore what those words about policies that work and what the best available evidence actually might mean. And I'm going to try and unpack them a bit in the course of this discussion. I'm starting from the position that politics takes place in an arena where power and ideas are both contested, and where people of goodwill can sincerely differ and the rest can do so insincerely if they wish to. So in such contexts, separating knowledge from opinion is invariably difficult, let alone separating knowledge from values. Now, our politicians are elected on the basis of manifestos, and while those hardly constitute an iron mandate, they are expected to deliver certain outcomes. And when I say policies that work, I don't mean simply the cynical view that policies that will work till the next election or that fool most of the people enough of the time. I'm talking about serious political activity which does deliver policies which are intended at least to do lasting sustainable good. And for the politicians who are trying to deliver those sorts of policies, the physical, the economic, the social constraints on policy making are not things to be got round, but actually completely crucial to the process of delivery. And I think for the politician, the skill, sorry, this is a cliche, but using Bismarck's famous expression, the politics is about the art of the possible. And it's worth remembering that in at least one version of that statement, he said that politics is not a science, it is an art. And the big issue for the political leader is to assess what is possible, physically, economically, socially, and that includes what is scientifically feasible, and that's where the expert community comes in. But the great leader really is the one who can change the social acceptability of a new idea. Your nod to Lincoln, I was thinking of the 13th Amendment. It's about taking what is possible and then making something rather more possible. As we can see on things like the US position on climate change, no matter how good the evidence and the science, without that social acceptability, it's not really possible to deliver change. And that takes me into then the role of evidence in this business about making policy possible. We talk a lot in the UK about evidence-based policy making to the point that it's become a cliche, but it's worth remembering that that was coined as a term to counter the tendency to come up with the policy idea first and then to hunt around for the sort of evidence that might actually back it up. Evidence-backed policy making is not what we're trying to do. But I think the value of the concept, in fact, lies in the model of policy making it suggests, which starts with an open formulation of a problem and follows on to open and challengeable analysis of the available evidence underpinning the issue. Of course, the nature of science is that the evidence will always be provisional at best, incomplete, open to improvement. But we owe it to politicians to offer as wide a range of options as possible and to explain what is known and what is not known, what we understand of the risks and where we're uncertain or ignorant. And this at least gives those who have to take the decisions the best possible chance to find workable options bounded by knowledge and where they have a room for value judgment. Secondly, I think policies to be workable need to be trusted by the public and by the stakeholders affected by the policies. And the trust comes in part from them being demonstrably based on the best available understanding and moreover trustworthy because the workings that led to the policy decisions are themselves visible and open to challenge and have been challenged. And I think as science advisors we need to recognise that we must be open to challenge not only by expert peers but by the truly ignorant. We need to have the humility, I think, to listen and to try to understand the basis of questions and to try to explain in plain language and then to test our understanding before going further. In any case, I think the value of openness comes back to something I've said many times before, and that's to Rumsfeld's fourth category, the one he didn't mention, and the unknown knowns. If you're open in your processes, there is a reasonable chance that people will tell you things they know which you don't, and that is very important to ensuring that our evidence base is comprehensive. Thirdly, I think we're looking for policies that are not only based on good evidence and trustworthy evidence, but policies that are actually persuasive. Politicians need to be able to persuade people that the direction of travel is a good one to go. And that means that the policies need to be addressed towards stakeholder needs and the needs of those that policy leaders need to persuade. And for policy solutions to be recognised as fitting the needs of stakeholders, or at least being worthy of experimentation, it's essential that we should be able to demonstrate that we have listened to and addressed stakeholder issues, and that the evidence base, therefore, that we're using is comprehensive and unbiased. The moment you say that, of course, you realise that the gaps in scientific knowledge are often so great that the space for principled disagreement will be large. So we need honesty about those gaps and a willingness to test multiple options so that both policymakers and the public can understand the relative impacts of different approaches and choose between them on the basis of values. Now, if that formulation is right, then I think it says something about the people we need as expert advisors in government. And I would base this around three criteria. I think firstly, we need scientists who understand that policy problems by their nature are multifactorial and who are therefore prepared to work across disciplines. And by that I mean natural scientists who can not only work across the boundaries of scientific disciplines but also and especially are able and willing to work with social scientists, including economists. And I have to put in a vice versa there. We are all trained in disciplinary thinking, but it's the ability to be open and curious that is so important in helping us to deliver joined-up thinking about policy solutions. I think that requires of the expert in government an expertise in depth in a few areas and expertise in breadth about the context of the work that they're doing, and along with that the ability to network to other experts in depth outside of government to enable the widest range of thinking to be brought to bear on the problems. I think secondly, we need scientists who understand epistemology. The nature of decision making is that it always takes place at a point where the science is incomplete. And indeed politics and policy making is about that space between the facts where value judgment is not only permissible but is actually essential, and it is the space in which politicians earn their pay. And it's vital that science advisors understand that provisional and improvable nature of scientific knowledge and how to explain that to non-scientists. And in turn, I think that means that science advisors need a thorough and professional understanding of the concepts of risk, uncertainty, ambiguity and ignorance. And let me just doff my cap to Andy Sterling at this point. Risk assessment and the development of risk management options should be a core skill for science advisors. As we can see in the European Union at the moment, the drift from risk-based to hazard-based policies suggests that risk really is not understood as it should be, and it's a very retrograde step. But we also need science advisors who can recognise ambiguity and uncertainty when they see it. I don't need to tell this audience that what I'm talking about is the space that Sylvia Funtowitz and Jerry Ravitz referred to as post-normal science, or Weinberg's concept of trans science. In other words, the point at which linear models no longer apply and where value judgment becomes a legitimate part of the policy process. What all that should lead us to, though, is open, plural formulations of advice around options in which quantitative analysis is recognised as essential but insufficient, and qualitative assessment is recognised as providing an essential contribution. And I suppose what all that adds up to is that science advisors need to recognise the place of value judgment and public involvement, and indeed have the aptitudes for and interest in politics and policies. They must be able to translate social and policy questions into scientific questions, and then approach the emerging science to translate that back into policy advice and options. And they need to have the political judgment to get their timing right, as well as their communications. There's absolutely nothing more useless than good advice the day after the decision. These aren't common competencies in the science community. Reasonably enough, most scientists are primarily interested in their own science, and most in the political arena, and no better able to judge or decide than any other member of the public, which is where I worry slightly about the science advocate role. The relatively few who have these aptitudes need to be identified and developed to fill the ranks of a profession which I think of in a hyphenated way as scientist-in-policy making. In other words, a rather different... 2 minutes, thank you. Rather different profession to that of researcher or consultant, or for that matter, policy maker. And I think we need these science and policy professionals inside our policy making systems rather than outside pushing advice in. In other words, drawing advice into it. And that leaves a couple of practical implications. I think one particular challenge I'd put out to the academic institutions is that we really need to think through the training of young scientists. Training in business applications of science these days is a not uncommon part of a first degree or postgraduate training. But it is really time that we got a basic grounding in epistemology and in the workings of government and society added in as a standard part of the science curriculum. Among other things, I think such exposure would help students themselves understand better where they might have the interest or aptitude to come and join us in government, making sure that the best possible evidence gets into policy making. Thank you.